Hello and welcome to another deep dive. Today we are shifting gears quite a bit. Usually we are sprinting through some tech breakthrough or maybe trying to unravel a complex geopolitical knot, but today we are slowing the tempo down significantly.
I really are. We're stepping back in time.
Yeah, we're looking at a text that is 2,000 years old, but as we're going to see, it reads like a modern legal thriller. I mean, we are talking about corruption, bribery, a high-stakes courtroom drama, and a defendant whose strategy is frankly baffling to the modern mind.
It really is an incredible narrative. We are taking a deep dive into the book of Acts, specifically chapter 24. And we are basing this whole discussion on a very thoughtful essay by Brother Woody Brom titled Key Aspects of the Way, mentioned in Acts 24.
Right.
And I want to set the expectation right out of the gate for you listening. This isn't about hot takes. We aren't here to deconstruct faith or go digging for controversies.
Exactly. The goal here is a reflective pastoral exploration. We want to approach this as thoughtful believers, or at least thoughtful learners, who want to understand what the text actually says. Because usually when we hear about the gospel, we picture a pulpit or maybe a street corner preacher.
Which is the normal context we think of, yes.
But in Acts 24, the gospel shows up in a very different setting.
It shows up in a courtroom. It is a highly hostile environment. You have the Apostle Paul standing before a Roman governor named Felix, and the accusations against him are entirely designed to frame his face as a civic danger.
And in the middle of this legal pressure cooker, Paul uses a specific term to describe his life. He calls himself a follower of the way. The way.
It sounds almost like a sci-fi term or maybe a Taoist concept to our ears, but here it is right in the New Testament. And the mission for this deep dive is to figure out what that means for you today. We're going to unpack the history, analyze the legal strategy in this trial, look at the theology, and then this is the part I am really interested in, apply it to our actual lives. Because if the way is just a history lesson, who really cares?
Exactly. But if it is a way of living today, that is different.
Precisely. So we are going to walk through the historical background, the narrative of the trial itself, the theological meaning, and the practical application. It is a very dense chapter, so we are going to take our time.
Let's start with that core term, the way. To a modern ear, it sounds a bit like a branding exercise, like a trendy church trying to be cool. But I am guessing in the first century you didn't choose a name just to look good. What is the actual origin here?
It definitely wasn't a marketing slogan. It was a very bold claim to fulfillment. To understand this, you have to get into the Jewish mindset of the time. In Hebrew thinking, life wasn't a static state of being, it was a journey.
A physical journey?
Well, a metaphorical one that dictated your physical steps.
Yeah.
The Hebrew word for Jewish law, halakha, literally comes from the verb meaning to walk.
Oh, wow. So religion wasn't just a set of beliefs you held in your head, it was a path you walked on.
Precisely. It was about movement. It was about how you navigated the world around you. And this goes way back in the Old Testament. Think about Psalm 1, verse 6. It contrasts the way of the righteous with the way of the wicked.
Right.
That isn't just a contrast of opinions or political parties. It signals a trajectory. One road leads to life, and the other road just disappears.
So it is completely destination-oriented.
Yes. Or look at Isaiah 40, verse 3. This is the famous prophecy about John the Baptist. Prepare the way for the Lord. The imagery there is civil engineering. It is about building a straight road so the king can arrive.
And Deuteronomy 5 talks about walking in the Lord's ways too, right?
Exactly. Deuteronomy 5:33 tells Israel to walk in the Lord's ways. So when the early Christians started calling their movement, the way they weren't inventing a new vocabulary at all, they were claiming that the ancient map had finally led somewhere.
So they were essentially saying, that path you've been reading about in the prophets for centuries, we found the destination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were claiming that the promised path had reached its ultimate goal in Jesus. It wasn't just a way to live, it was the way.
That is a massive claim. And in the first century, bold claims usually got you into trouble. Set the scene for us politically, because this trial in Acts 24 isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, it is happening in a political powder keg. This is the era of Second Temple Judaism. And we often think of the Jewish people in the Bible as one monolithic block, but that is not true at all.
They had factions.
It was a world of lively, intense debate. You had the Pharisees, you had the Sadducees, you had the Essenes out in the desert. They were constantly arguing about everything. Resurrection angels, how to properly interpret the Torah.
So it was a very active marketplace of ideas.
It was. But sitting on top of that marketplace was the heavy hand of the Roman Empire. And Rome didn't care about your theology. They didn't care if you believed in angels or if you didn't. They cared about one thing: order. the Pax Romana.
Which means Roman peace, but that was usually enforced by a sword.
Right. Rome generally permitted ancestral customs. They let Jewish people worship how they wanted to a certain point. But they were absolutely allergic to riots. They had zero tolerance for political unrest. If a religious debate spilled out into the street and blocked traffic, Rome stepped in with force.
So if I am a Jewish leader and I want to get rid of Paul, I can't just go to the Roman governor and say, hey, Paul has bad theology.
Exact. The governor would laugh you right out of the room. He would say, that is your problem. Go deal with it. So the legal strategy for the prosecution was to reframe the religious argument as a political danger. You have to convince Rome that this person isn't just a heretic. You have to prove he is a revolutionary. He is a threat to the empire itself.
And that is where we see this specific language used against Paul in the chapter. They call him a ringleader of the Nazarene sect.
That word sect is crucial here. In Greek, it is heresis, which gives us our English word heresy. But in this specific legal context, the accusers are using it to categorize the movement as something suspicious, something deviant.
They are marginalizing him.
Yes. By calling it a sect, they're trying to strip away its legitimacy as an ancestral custom. They are saying to the governor, this isn't true Judaism. This is a splinter group. It is a cult. And we all know cults cause riots.
So Paul's defense has to carefully thread a needle here. He has to prove he is a faithful Jew, so he falls under the legal protection of ancestral customs. But he also has to prove he is not a political revolutionary.
That is exactly the dynamic at play. He has to show that the way is completely continuous with the Jewish faith, not a dangerous departure from it.
Okay, let's go straight into the courtroom. Acts 24. Who are the players in the room?
On the prosecution side, you have the high priest Ananias and some elders. But they know they aren't experts in Roman law, so they hire a hired gun, a professional lawyer named Tertullus.
Tertullus, he sounds like the kind of guy who has a very expensive billboard on the highway.
He is a very smooth operator. We have his opening statement recorded in Acts 24, verses 1 through 9. And if you analyze it rhetorically, it is a masterclass in what the Romans called captatio benevolentiae, capturing the goodwill of the judge.
How does he do that?
He starts with this over-the-top flattery of Felix the governor. He talks about the profound peace Felix has secured and the wonderful reforms he has made for the nation.
Is any of that true? Was Felix actually a great governor?
Not even close. And this is where knowing the history makes the text just pop. Felix was actually a brutal, corrupt, and highly incompetent governor. Tacitus, the famous Roman historian, wrote a scathing line about him. He said, Felix exercised the power of a king with the spirit of a slave.
Ouch. The spirit of a slave. What does that actually mean in that context?
It refers to his literal background. Felix was a freedman, a former slave who had risen to a position of immense power, largely because his brother had influence the emperor. But Tacitus implies he never lost that servile, grasping, insecure mindset. He was cruel, mainly because he was terrified of losing his position.
So when Tertullus stands there praising his profound peace and reforms, everyone in the room knows it is a complete lie.
Yes, but it is the legal game you play. You flatter the judge.
So Tertullus butters him up. Then he pivots to the actual charges against Paul. What are they?
He lays out 3 specific accusations. First, he calls Paul a plague.
A plague! That is incredibly dehumanizing. He's literally calling him a disease.
It is a harsh word. He says Paul is a plague stirring up riots among all the Jews all over the world. That's the political charge. He is painting Paul as a global agitator. Second, he calls him a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. That is the dangerous cult angle we talked about.
Right. And the third charge.
Third, he accuses Paul of attempting to desecrate the temple.
Now that last one, desecrating the temple, that is a capital offense in Jewish law right now. Rome actually allowed the Jewish authorities to execute people for that specific crime.
Yes, they did. If Paul had actually defiled the temple, Felix would have been within his rights to just hand him over to them for execution. But here is the massive weakness in the prosecution's case. It is all hearsay. It completely relies on innuendo.
Where's the proof?
Exactly. The source material points out a glaring legal hole here. The offended parties from Asia, the very people who supposedly saw Paul doing this stuff in the temple in chapter 21, they aren't even there in the courtroom.
That seems like a major procedural error. You can't just say, I saw him do it, and then when the judge asks where you are, the lawyer says, well, I heard it from a guy who wasn't here today.
Exactly. In Roman law, just like today, you need actual witnesses to corroborate the charges. The people from Asia who started the initial riot are conspicuously absent. Tertullus is trying to win on vibes and fear not actual evidence. He is trying to trigger Felix's paranoia about rebellion.
So Tertullus sits down, probably feeling pretty good about his rhetorical performance. Now it is Paul's turn. And I have to say, this is the moment where I would probably be panicking. I would be shouting,
Oh.
that is a lie. He is lying. But Paul doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't.
Mhm.
Paul's demeanor is the very first part of his defense. He is incredibly calm and respectful. He acknowledges Felix's long tenure by saying, I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over this nation. But notice, he doesn't flatter him.
He doesn't stoop to Tertullus's level.
Right. He doesn't lie and say Felix is a good governor. He just states a factual reality. You have been here a long time, so you know how things work in this region.
That is a subtle but really important difference. He is respectful of the office, but he maintains his own integrity.
Exactly. And then he just refutes the charges with basic facts. He challenges the timeline. He basically pulls out his calendar and says, look, I have only been in Jerusalem for 12 days.
12 days total.
12 days. And part of that time was spent traveling. He says I didn't even have time to organize a global insurrection if I wanted to. He denies manipulating any crowds. He denies disputing in the synagogue. He says I went to the temple to worship. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to pray.
And then comes the pivot. The essay highlights this as the crucial moment where Paul actually owns the label but completely redefines it.
Yes, Acts 24, verse 14. It is one of the most important verses in the entire chapter. He says to Felix, however, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect.
He doesn't run from the term at all.
He fully embraces it, but he strips the sect label of its political danger. He follows up by saying, I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets.
So he is telling Felix, I am not a deviant. I am an Orthodox Jew who simply believes the promises of my people have come true.
Yes. And then he brings up the resurrection. He says, I have the same hope in God that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked.
Why introduce a heavy theological concept like the resurrection in a legal defense? That seems like it would just confuse a Roman governor.
It is a brilliant move for two specific reasons. One, it splits the prosecution. Remember, the high priest Ananias is likely a Sadducee, and the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection.
Oh, right, but the Pharisees did.
Exactly. By asserting the resurrection, Paul aligns himself with the mainstream of Jewish thought, which is the Pharisees. He is showing Felix, look, this isn't a political rebellion against Rome. This is an internal theological debate among Jewish scholars.
Which Rome absolutely hates getting involved in.
Precisely. He is making the case boring for Felix. He is making it a Jewish religious matter. But secondly, and more importantly, it shows his motivation for living a good life. He is saying to the court, I live my life based on the firm belief that I will one day stand before God as my judge.
He also points to his actual actions to back that up. He mentions bringing alms and offerings.
That is the evidence of his life. Tertullus called him a plague and a global troublemaker. Paul says, actually, I came to bring money to the poor. This refers to the collection he had been gathering for years from Gentile churches to help the famine-struck believers in Jerusalem. It is really hard to paint someone as a dangerous terrorist when their primary mission in your city was a charity run.
Yeah, I came to bring food to the hungry. That is a very tough thing for a prosecutor to spin into treason.
It is. He also mentions he was ritually purified. He deeply respected the temple customs. So piece by piece, he deconstructs the entire case. There were no riots. There was no temple desecration. There was just charity and worship.
So logically speaking, the trial should be over right there. Case dismissed. Paul walks free.
In a just world, yes, absolutely.
But we aren't in a just world. We are in Felix's corrupt court. So what actually happens?
Felix adjourns the proceedings. He delays. But the text adds a fascinating detail. It says, Felix knew the way.
What does that mean exactly? How would a pagan Roman governor know anything about the way?
Christianity had been spreading for decades at this point. There were believers in Caesar's own household in Rome. It is highly likely Felix knew that these people weren't violent revolutionaries. He had seen enough of them to know they were generally peaceful. So he probably knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Paul was innocent of sedition.
So why not just let him go? If he knows he's innocent, why keep him?
Because he is a politician, first and foremost. He didn't want to upset the powerful Jewish leaders, Ananias and the elders, by releasing Paul. That could cause the exact political unrest he was trying to avoid.
Right.
But he also couldn't legally convict him because there was zero evidence and Paul was a Roman citizen. So he chooses the middle path. Indefinite detention. He simply kicks the can down the road.
And this leads to the next scene, which I find incredibly fascinating. Paul is in custody, and Felix and his wife Drusilla send for him. They want to hear him speak privately. Who is Drusilla?
Drusilla is a very key piece of the psychological puzzle here.
Yeah.
She was Jewish, and she was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I. That is the king who executed the Apostle James back in Acts chapter 12.
Oh, wow. So she has deep family history with the apostles and the early church.
Very deep history. She was a Jewish princess, married very young, and widely considered one of the most beautiful women of her time. She'd been married to a king in Syria, but Felix, using a magician as a go-between, actually convinced her to leave her husband and marry him instead.
So their marriage itself was a massive scandal, a direct violation of Jewish law.
A huge scandal. Adultery, breaking the law of Moses, you name it. So picture the scene. You have Felix, a former slave, insecure, cruel, and Drusilla, a Jewish princess, living in a highly public, adulterous marriage. And they call the Apostle Paul in to talk to them about faith in Christ Jesus.
It sounds almost like they just wanted some evening entertainment. Like, let's bring in the famous prisoner and hear his interesting philosophy.
Exactly. It was probably mere intellectual curiosity for them. But Paul doesn't give them a polite TED Talk. He speaks to them about three very specific things. And the list is quite jarring when you think about who he is talking to. He speaks about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come.
Okay, let's unpack those three because that is wild. Why those specific topics? If I am Paul and I want to get out of jail, maybe I talk about God's forgiveness. Or maybe just God is love. Why hit this powerful, corrupt couple with self-control?
Because Paul isn't trying to win his freedom. He is trying to save their souls. And to save them, he has to address the specific glaring idols in their lives.
Let's look at the first one, righteousness.
Righteousness is God's standard of perfect justice. Felix is a profoundly corrupt judge who takes bribes. He desperately needs to hear about true, unbending justice.
And the second one is self-control.
Yes. Think about it. Felix seduced another man's wife. He is a man completely ruled by his appetites, for power, for sex, for money. To look a tyrant in the eye and speak of self-control, of governing one's own desires, is an incredibly brave act.
And then the third topic is the judgment to come.
This is the kicker. Felix thinks he is the ultimate judge. He literally sits on the tribunal seat. Paul is gently but firmly reminding him, you are not the ultimate authority here. There is a court above your court. And one day, Felix, you will be the defendant.
That is just so bold. He is essentially putting the governor on trial in his own palace.
He is. And the reaction is visceral. The text says Felix was afraid. The old King James Version says he trembled.
He was shook.
He was visibly shook because the gospel stopped being an abstract philosophical theory and became a direct personal confrontation. It exposed the violent collision between his selfish ambition and God's perfect holiness.
But then we get the tragedy of this story.
Yes. Felix says, that is enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you.
When I find it convenient, that has to be one of the saddest sentences in the entire Bible.
It is the ultimate tragedy of delay. He shook with moral clarity. He knew deep down Paul was telling the truth. But he flatly refused to submit to it. He pushed the snooze button on his own conscience. And as far as history tells us, a convenient time never came for him.
And the text adds a really cynical footnote right after that. It says, he sent for Paul, frequently hoping for a bribe.
That is exactly the spirit of a slave that Tacitus talked about. Even after trembling at the thought of eternal judgment, the petty greed just crept right back in. He kept Paul in prison for 2 years, chatting with him frequently, just hoping Paul's friends would slip him some cash to let him go.
2 years. That is a long time to sit in a cell just because a politician wants a payout.
It is. And eventually, Felix gets recalled to Rome in disgrace. Because of some local riots he completely mishandled. And he leaves Paul in prison just to do the Jewish leaders a favor as he walks out the door. A final, cynical act of political calculation.
What a heavy, intense story. We have the sheer courage of Paul contrasting with the profound cowardice of Felix. I want to shift gears now, though. We have done the history, and we have walked through the narrative. I want to move into the theological significance of the way. The essay we are using highlights several key points here, and I want to walk through each of them for the listener. The first one is Jesus as the road.
Yes, this connects beautifully back to our opening discussion about Halakha and the path. But there's a crucial theological shift here. In the Old Testament, the way was often understood as the law itself, the Torah. But the way in Acts cannot be disconnected from John chapter 14, verse 6, where Jesus explicitly says, I am the way and the truth and the life.
So the path isn't just a list of rules anymore. It is a person.
Correct. The path is deeply personal because the ultimate promise is a person. Following the way doesn't just mean adopting a new moral lifestyle. It means literally following Jesus. It means walking where he walked and loving how he loved.
The second theological point in the essay is about continuity and accountability, and specifically this idea of conscience. In his defense, Paul says, "So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man." Now, I want to pause on that word conscience, because today I think we really misuse it. We tend to think of conscience as just a feeling, like I feel guilty about eating that second donut, or my conscience is clear because I don't feel bad about what I did.
Right, we treat it entirely as an internal mood. But in the biblical sense, and definitely in Paul's defense here, conscience is much more robust than that. Think of it less like a mood ring and more like a building code.
A building code. Okay, explain that.
When an architect says a building is up to code, they don't mean they have warm, fuzzy feelings about the building. They mean the physical structure aligns perfectly with an external objective standard. It means it won't collapse under pressure.
That is a really helpful analogy. So, having a clear conscience means my life is structurally sound according to God's standard.
Exactly. It means my inner life before God and my outer life before man are in total alignment. There is no hidden duplicity. Paul is essentially saying to the court, I haven't violated the structural integrity of my faith, and I haven't violated Roman law. It is a life properly ordered by God's will. It isn't just about feeling good. It is about being true.
And that naturally links to the next point in the essay, which is resurrection-shaped hope. We
Mhm.
talked earlier about why he used this legally to split the Pharisees and Sadducees, but why does this doctrine matter practically for a believer?
Because it completely redefines power in the present moment. Think about Paul's physical situation. He is in chains. Felix, a corrupt pagan, holds the power of life and death over him.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in the resurrection, then Felix is the most important person in the room.
Mhm.
He holds your entire fate in his hands.
Right. If this life is all there is, Felix wins.
But if you truly believe that God raises the dead, both the righteous and the wicked, then you know that Felix is just a middle manager.
A middle manager. I love that.
He is a middle manager in a very temporary administration. The ultimate final verdict comes from God alone. That changes everything. That gives you immense courage. It allows you to speak truth to power without paralyzing fear, because Paul knows that an earthly court cannot cancel God's eternal verdict.
That brings a certain sobriety, too. Sobriety is a word the essay specifically uses here.
Yes, because judgment is real for everyone. It means we live right now as people who already belong to the age to come. We don't have to panic when things go terribly wrong in the present, because we know the final end of the story.
The essay also discusses this concept of spirit versus stone. What does that mean in the context of the way?
This references the beautiful prophecy in Jeremiah 31 about the new covenant. God promised to one day write his law on human hearts, not just on cold tablets of stone like at Sinai. The way affirms the absolute goodness of God's law. Remember, Paul loudly says he believes the law and prophets, but the way provides the Holy Spirit's power to actually obey it.
So it changes the motivation.
Exactly. It is the fundamental difference between obeying a rule strictly because you are afraid of punishment, which is the stone, and obeying God because you have been radically changed from the inside out, which is the Spirit.
I also really appreciate the essay's point about public and reasonable faith. Paul isn't hiding in a cave somewhere practicing a secret religion.
And he is not. And this is so crucial for us today. Christianity is not a secret esoteric mystery cult. It boldly invites public scrutiny. Paul stands there and says, check the facts, check my timeline, go talk to the witnesses in Jerusalem. He firmly believes the gospel can stand its ground in an open court of law. It moves in public civic spaces with absolute integrity.
Sometimes I think we fall into the trap of thinking faith is just a private, mystical experience for Sunday mornings.
Right. But Paul shows us that true faith actively interacts with the real world. It interacts with law, with history, and as we see next, with charity.
Yes, speaking of charity, let's talk about the point titled Mercy as Doctrine Embodied.
I really love that phrase. Paul mentions bringing gifts for the poor as his primary reason for being in Jerusalem. Don't miss the staggering logistics of that effort. Paul traveled hundreds of miles on foot and by boat, carrying heavy bags of money to help poor people he might not even know personally.
It wasn't just a theory to him.
No. Theology isn't just abstract ideas floating in your head. It necessarily results in practical sacrificial care for others. The essay puts it so beautifully. It says, a way that doesn't serve isn't the way of Jesus.
That is quite a challenge for the listener. If I say I am a follower of the way, but I am not generous with my resources, am I really on the path?
That is the ultimate question. If your proclaimed theology doesn't ever move your wallet, it might not be real theology at all.
The final theological point is honoring Israel embracing nations.
This is Paul brilliantly walking the line. He maintains absolute fidelity to his Jewish roots. He worships the God of his ancestors. But he simultaneously acknowledges that the message of salvation is now open for everyone. It is the glorious fulfillment of the promise given to Israel, expanding outward to embrace all the nations of the earth. It is not a replacement of Israel. It is an expansion of grace.
Okay, so we have this incredibly rich theological framework, but I want to land the plane now. I want to get deeply practical. We are regular people listening to this. Most of us aren't appearing before Roman governors, hopefully. So what does Acts 24 mean for you, the listener, right now in your everyday life? The essay talks about the integration of life.
This perfectly answers the question of how do we apply Paul's clear conscience in a modern setting like a workplace or a school. Think about the immense pressure we all face to compartmentalize our lives. We have our church self for Sundays and our work self for Mondays. And maybe at work you cut a few corners, you fluff the quarterly numbers a bit because, hey, that's just business. Or you stay quiet when you see something clearly unethical happening because you don't want to rock the boat and risk your promotion. Right. We justify it by saying it's a different environment.
But the way completely rejects that split. Paul stood before Felix, the most powerful man in the region, and said, I strive always to keep my conscience clear. Integration means true integrity. It means paying what is legally due. Telling the whole truth, even when a small lie would be much easier.
Serving even when you were in intimidated rooms.
Exactly. It is knowing deep down that your work life and your worship life are the exact same life before God. If you routinely cheat on your taxes, you are stepping off the way, just as much as if you completely stopped praying. That is deeply convicting. It really raises the bar for everyday discipleship. What about the application for hope in seasons of delay? We talked earlier about Paul sitting in that Caesarean prison for 2 whole years. I have to be totally honest. I hate waiting. If I am in a grocery store checkout line for 10 minutes, I get visibly annoyed. 2 years locked in a dungeon. That feels like a tragic waste of a life.
It feels like a waste to us because our modern culture is utterly obsessed with efficiency and speed. But God is primarily interested in witness and character. Think about those 2 years. Was Paul useless? No. He had frequent unprecedented access to the Roman governor of Judea. He was witnessing directly to the Roman elite.
Which he never would have done otherwise.
Right. He was also likely writing letters, praying and encouraging the local believers who visited him. For you listening today, if you are dealing with a chronic illness or a drawn-out legal battle or a stalled career, if you are in that painful waiting room experience of life, Acts 24 profoundly teaches us that patience isn't passivity.
Patience isn't passivity. Say a little more about that distinction.
Passive waiting is just sitting in a chair, angry and bitter that the bus hasn't arrived yet. Active patience, or Christian patience, is faith working through love while acknowledging that time is safely in God's hands. It is looking around and saying, I am here in this prison cell or this hospital bed or this dead-end job. How can I witness right here? How can I strive to keep my conscience clear in this specific place?
That totally flips the script.
The essay says the future isn't a loop of mishap. It's a promised day of justice. If you know with certainty that ultimate justice is coming, you can faithfully endure the temporary injustice of the delay.
That completely changes the perspective. You aren't just a helpless victim of time, you are an active servant in time.
Exactly. You are on mission, even in the waiting room.
And then there's the practical application of mercy as worship. We touched on this with his alms, but how do we make this actionable today?
It is a strong encouragement to make care for the poor and vulnerable a planned, intentional part of your life, not just extra credit when you feel generous. Paul planned that massive relief trip to Jerusalem. He carried those financial gifts intentionally for months.
So we need to look at our actual habits.
Yes. Look at your household budget. Look at your calendar. Is mercy actually scheduled? Do you have a literal line item for the way? Or is it just something you do if you happen to have leftover change at the end of the month? Intentional mercy keeps the church from just being a speaking-only community.
Finally, the essay highlights speaking wisely to power. Most of us aren't standing trial before a Felix, but we do have bosses. We interact with school boards. We vote for local officials.
The underlying principle absolutely holds. Notice Paul's specific tone in the courtroom. He didn't scream at Felix. He didn't call him names or insult his character publicly. But he also absolutely didn't flatter him. He didn't say, oh, you're such a great guy, Felix. We all love your leadership.
He found the middle ground of truth and grace.
He confidently named moral realities, righteousness, self-control judgment. But he did it with patience and humility, and he linked them directly to God. The ultimate goal, as the essay wisely states, is not to win arguments. It is to win people to the Savior.
That is a huge distinction for our cultural moment.
Yeah.
Winning the argument versus winning the person. If Paul had just wanted to win the political argument, he could have rhetorically ripped Felix apart for his well-known corruption. He would have felt great doing it, and he probably would have been executed immediately. But he wanted to win the man's soul, so he spoke directly to his conscience.
And doing that requires the active leading of the Holy Spirit. It requires deep spiritual wisdom to know exactly what to say. Paul knew exactly what buttons to push, not to trigger Felix's anger, but to try to wake up his deadened conscience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Acts 24, let's summarize what we have found. The way isn't just a historic vocabulary term for scholars to debate.
No, it is a living path. It is a life marked by truthful worship. It is marked by public integrity, which means having a clear conscience before God and man. It is marked by generous, planned mercy, by patient, enduring hope in the face of agonizing delay, and by courageous witness before those in power.
It really is a comprehensive roadmap.
It is a roadmap for today, not just a dusty museum exhibit. It spans from the ordinary rooms of our homes to the official halls of power. It is quite literally the life of Jesus lived out through us by the transformative power of the Spirit.
It is challenging, but it is also deeply inviting. It invites us out of compartmentalization and into a life of real wholeness. To close our time together, I want to return to the biblical text itself. We have talked a lot about it, but I want to read the specific scripture that started this whole conversation. This is Paul's bold confession in Acts 24, verses 14 through 16. I want you to listen to this not just as an ancient legal defense, but as a patentic mission statement for your own life.
That is exactly how we should hear it.
However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, and I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man.
That is the ultimate goal. To strive every day for a clear, integrated conscience firmly anchored in the hope of God's final justice. And so for you listening today, whether you are currently in a painful season of waiting a season of intense workplace pressure or just the ordinary grind of the week, here is our simple blessing for you.
May you find the steady courage to walk the way with a perfectly clear conscience and a deeply hopeful heart. May you trust that your times are securely in God's hands, just as Paul's were, even when the wait feels unbearably long. And may you intimately know the deep, lasting peace of the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. Amen.
Doing that.
Thanks for diving in with us. We will see you next time.